This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Right On, showcasing the work of Otago Southland writers. I'm Beverly Martens. Join me for news and interviews with local writers on the second Wednesday of every month from noon till 1 and replayed the following Sunday at 1 p.m. Right On is brought to you by the Otago Southland branch of the New Zealand Society of Authors and kindly supported by the great team at the University Bookshop.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the University Bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Right On, brought to you by the Otago Southland branch of the Society of Authors in partnership with the University Bookshop. Now, this month's show has an overarching theme of matriarchy and the profound influence of mothers and grandmothers in the most recent works of two very accomplished local writers, Majella Cullinane and Penelope Todd. First up is Penelope talking about her new novel, Nell, which is based on the life and times of her own grandmother, Eleanor. Welcome to the show, Penelope.
Thanks, Beverly.
Now, I understand that Nell had its genesis at the Aotearoa Writers' Retreat back in 2020, when you got some interesting feedback.
Well, that was one part of the genesis. I think. Yes, well, I was up there for a week-long writers' retreat, and I talked with, I think it was Paula Wagemaker, who's an editor, and she, I just was uncertain about where I was going. I knew that I was creating a series of scenes featuring my grandmother, but I really wasn't sure where they were going, and she made the suggestion that they were like cameos in a necklace.
So that was a lovely phrase.
Yeah. So I decided, okay, I'll carry on until I get right round the neck, as it were.
And then maybe a bracelet, maybe. Yeah. And what I wondered was, given that Nell lived kind of in the Maniatoto, Danzi's Pass, and around that area, didn't she? Mackenzie country as well. Did actually being in that landscape at that time help you to sort of get going on it?
It's hard to say. The aunt, one of the twins mentioned in the book, still has an old house up near Naseby, quite close to the farm that my grandparents farmed. So I do go up there. I love the landscape, and I was also aware that my grandmother was very attached to that landscape and felt a lot of pain on leaving it. So actually, the very first scene I wrote, possibly, was actually when she's just learned that they have to leave the farm in very short order, that it's been sold without her knowledge. So yes, the pain of that, and I guess the pain of her losses that were probably not spoken about very much within the family were some of the impetus I wanted to explore.
I was just thinking about that sort of the necklace idea. That meant that you could kind of write it in scenes and then start to stitch it together later. Would that be
Absolutely,
a fair comment?
I did. I'd find myself writing a scene in the 50s and then one in the 30s. In fact, that reminds me that I did probably, in fact, write the very first scene 20 years ago when I wrote a story for radio that Radio New Zealand took up, of the stillbirth of her first son.
Right.
Yeah. So that was, in the 1920s. So, yes, I definitely just had scenes from all over the place. And in the end, I thought, well, why don't I just put them in chronological order, see what I've got, and then fill in the gaps. So I did. There's almost a scene for every year of her life.
Yes, I thought that was a good way to do it, actually. So this is your first sort of full-length novel since Island back in 2010?
Well, it's not the first I've written. I have a big, very bulky novel in a drawer. But do we talk about those or not?
No, we've all got those. The stall novel,
That's right,
as I like to call it.
novel.
Yeah. But I mean, you're well known and very acclaimed for your YA books in the early 2000s, and then your memoir Digging for Spain, and then the decade you devoted to Rosa Mira books, which was really bringing other writers into the limelight a little bit, wasn't it? So it's kind of been a while. Why did you want to write about Nell?
Well, did I want to write about her? I think I did, but I kind of got immersed in thinking about her because the twins who are mentioned in the book were ageing. They're the last of the 5 siblings to be alive still. And they began to be in decline, and so I got very involved in their care as the only niece, or they didn't have children of their own here in Dunedin. So they would often refer to their mother. She died in 1970 when they were, I just realised the other day, only about 30. So that's actually quite young.
Quite young to lose
So
your
I
mum.
think they kind of talked to one another a lot about her wisdom, and they still refer to her today. Mother would this. Mother would have said that. Or it's almost as if they just channeled a little word from their mother, as their source of wisdom. So, and I'd heard from my own mother, who's the daughter-in-law, that she was a very kind, wise woman. And so she seemed, I didn't know her so well.
No, because you were about 13 when she passed.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you have any compelling memories of her?
No.
No, that's interesting.
Sadly,
yeah.
just as I've written in the start of the book, at all, I use the word aloof, but perhaps reserved would be more accurate. And
which is pretty generational, wasn't it?
Yeah, and deaf, so there was that handicap as well. And she was more reserved. Our grandfather was the one who was garrulous and would tell stories and captivated us with tales of heroism, sometimes his own.
What I guess I found interesting is that Nell as a character, she's fully formed as a person. We know that because she's based on a real person, as opposed to fully imagined like your other, characters in some of your other books. So was that helpful, or was that kind of daunting to bring her to life on the page?
I think because each scene seemed to come into being with its own kind of magic that I wasn't daunted. I think the dauntedness has come later if I've sort of over-apologised to my cousins saying, I know this is your grandmother too. This is my work of fiction, you keep yours as well, but I didn't want it to become the one reality
the definitive.
for the family. And I've kind of waited for people to kind of come back and say, oh, it wasn't like that, or that's not what I remember. But in fact, that hasn't happened.
I tell you what I find interesting, though, is that even within siblings of, the same generation, you have a different childhood, don't you? Because you might have been born, I'm just thinking about me and my sister, there's only 3.5 years between us, but we were born in quite different circumstances and where the attention of our parents was at the time, like they were just starting the poultry farm with me, so they just simply had less time, and I was the third child. So, like things like that, and so you can't say, oh, well, that's right and that's wrong. It's not, is it?
No, that's right. That's right. And then it's a remove again with my grandfather, my grandmother, because in fact, I don't have a lot of memories of her in action, as it were, but I have a sense of her, and of course she's, the flavour of the family is partly the flavour of Nell, and so I was able to kind of recreate the emotional texture, I think, of our family.
That's something I think you did particularly well. And what I also really liked about the book is the way that you come at major events like the Depression and both World Wars, and then of course when one of Nell's children suffers a dreadful accident, you sort of come at them at a slightly oblique angle in that they are not sort of they're not headlines writ large. They are sort of the aftermath and the sort of domestic reality that Nell has to live with as a consequence of these things. Is signature sort of style of yours? I feel like your writing's always very nuanced.
Yes, my touch is possibly a little too light at times.
Oh, what
like
makes you
pen
say?
skipping off the page. Well, it's probably true. I perhaps don't confront brutal reality as often as I might. But I did want to leave lots of space, and I think even in the way the book's been published, with a year for a scene per year, more or less, there's white space on the pages too, and I think I like to leave space for the reader to have their own experience of my characters, and I hope that happens, so I don't become too dense about any of the scenes. Well, I've entered some more than others, like I think the 2 deaths in the book. I think there's a bit of more material there, but again, it's not easy to know which elements of a life to pick out, and I really did have to trust serendipity in some respects. I keep thinking now of scenes that I could write or could have written, but I sort of trust that is the magic of the creative process in a way, isn't it? That you somehow know when something is complete enough, even though you're not entirely sure how you got there. You sort of trust the subconscious and the unconscious to be working on behalf of the
also,
conscious.
I think what you do is have a great relationship with the reader, and you trust the reader as well, so that because there was things in there just kind of about sibling things and that I would then want a moment to reflect about how that was in my life or in my family or those kinds of things. And I think that's just having that scaffolding is good for that, because you trust the reader to want to then have their own experiences and bring those experiences to the book. So it's not, every line laid out.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think that is exactly what I hope happens, and I hope and trust that Nell's experiences are in many respects universal experiences. And so when I've got a little cameo, I think this is something that happens among siblings, or this is how mothers feel about their children.
The challenge is to write that freshly, though, and not in any sort of cliched way, which you definitely haven't. The cliches aren't there. But the reason I ask that is to paraphrase Joanna Trollope, who was sometimes dismissed by the critics for her books being, terribly domestic. And in fact, she's an incredibly prolific and popular English author. But her response to that was, it's a grave mistake to think there is more significance in great things than little things.
I think that's right. And I dare I say, the older we become, the more we realise that, the intense beauty to be found just outside our doorsteps, on our doorsteps.
And in small actions and in small kindnesses too,
exactly.
I think. Because in the end, that is how you translate the world, isn't it? You translate it into actions, I think, in your life. And I think that's what I really, really liked about, reading about Nell, was how she coped with, especially with the death, the second death, and we won't be too much of a plot spoiler there, but... So where do you think that sort of nuance in your writing comes from?
I think I've probably always been a little bit oblique, and sometimes that's a great frustration possibly to others, certainly sometimes to me, as I realise I haven't communicated as clearly as I meant to.
Because you live in your head too much, do you mean? Do you think
yes, I do live in my head, rather. Although I try less and less to do the same, to do that less and less. I think... Also, practice. It's, when you first start writing, if you look back at some of that material, you see you've got far too many words, far too many, you've got all convoluted and included scenes that don't need to be there. I think those are things that you learn along the way, is what you can cut out to magnify what's left.
Yes. Yeah.
And also years of editing have helped me with that too, I think, as I've looked at other people's work and, almost... without meaning to, you pick up other people's skills or again examining a text and seeing what doesn't need to be there. So often you're carry that more than you're including.
You carry that skill over. What I also loved was Nell was older than you when she died, but you, in terms of having long marriage and being at, because you're a grandmother now yourself, the way that you the sort of social politics and the dynamics within a relationship. And I love the way that you reflected those through Nell. I just want to read a couple of things, a couple of wee quotes from the book. If Nell sometimes feels herself to be wiser than Herb, more cognizant of the people and influences around them, more aware of the stitches required to keep the fabric of daily life intact. I don't think that has changed in the generations in terms of, I think it's just something that women instinctively do. What's your thought about that?
You mean something we instinctively know or think we know?
Yeah.
Well, I think that is what we do, isn't it? We there's a great generalisation, but I think, the idea that we do multitask because we have our feelers out for the whole environs around us and wanting to include, it probably comes partly through having our own children, but also being a female in a family. We are kind of conditioned to know what everybody's doing and how to
meet their needs, and peacemaking, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's that strong element. So that's, I think I always find that interesting to think that you're reading historical fiction, but often a lot of it still kind of applies.
Yes, I think, some of the modus changes, but a lot of it, the emotional truth, probably remains the same.
That's a really good phrase. I think emotional truth is exactly right. And there was another lovely one near the quite near the end of the book, in the sort of like in the mid-50s when Herb and Nell were in their mid-50s as well. Just talking about, just you had that beautiful summing up of a relationship, which is that they have done their work upon one another. Chiselled, abraded, chipped and smoothed, angered and soothed, and some other descriptors, integrated and interlocked. I thought that was just charming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's what I mean about, you can examine one life, but it can stand in for the wider community, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, I write through the filter of my own life and experience too. Not entirely, because imagination is always called for to step into another life. But the fact that we've lived means that we have something to
something to offer and something some wisdom to impart. What has been your family's reaction to it? And I'm talking about the older aunts right down to your own children, across the generations. How have they? What's been their response to Nell?
Well, I told the older aunts a while back, and their responses indicated to me that they perhaps weren't going to even be able to read the book now. I think they might be at that stage. So while I've talked about it in the past, I'm still debating whether to actually give.
Oh, so they're not seen the physical copy. Oh, wow,
no.
That's interesting.
So things have really changed for them recently. And if I did, I think I might want to excise one or two scenes because they're quite conservative. And not that Nell isn't, a traditionalist in many respects. I don't know. I'm still actually
but there is intimacy in there, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, right. And what about your daughters then?
They seem to have universally been either silent or loved it. Well, I heard from a cousin today who said she was sitting on the beach in Rarotonga and she just gulped Nell down and cried and thanked me for that. So, was it a good thing to make a cousin cry? Yes, probably in that case. I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it does become, as you say, it's not definitive, it's not the only point of view, but it's still a lovely family treasure now, isn't it? Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. And you had, like at the launch, you kind of brought some of those physical things to life, didn't you, with the dresses and the baking? And what physical things did you have to go on when you started writing Nell? And is there anything surprising that you uncovered just from a physical article?
Well, the fact is that the family house still stands. And it is still in my aunt's possession. So that's where I've visited them in recent years, the twins, and that's the home that we're now going through piece by piece because they are in care. So, yes, I'm coming across photos of Nell. I'm coming across kitchen implements. Like I used a moolie.
Mum had one of those.
Yeah, we know moolies,
yes.
but somebody who was editing, I think, said, what's this thing? Is this a spelling mistake or what? And should it really have a capital M? You know what a moolie is. And also the thing I called a parsley grater. But, of course, it must have been a parsley mincer, but we called it a grater.
You
didn't know that? It's a little contraption with a sort of like a little tip truck top. And
like a garlic presser almost.
No, well, it had a little
this is hard to do on the radio,
that you'd
people.
trap. And you'd put the parsley in here and then you'd hold this shut and you'd turn the handle here and out would come all this minced parsley. It really was a parsley mincer. So not as attractive as chopped parsley, but
and messy to clean the implement. Just to clarify for listeners who may not know what a moolie is, it was sort of the precursor to a blender, really, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, a manual blender.
A manual blender that you would put...
it would have to be very soft things only that went through. So soft, well-cooked vegetables, for example.
And then you would just sort of puree them, really. That's what a moolie was. Right, so... I know as you say, you've got your work ahead of you, and within the family of resettling your aunts into care. My mother went into care 2 years ago, so I know what that's like, and it's a really difficult thing to clear a house, isn't it? You don't know. You've got to find that line between you want to keep some things, but in lots of other ways, because being the age and stage that we are, it's not like our own houses aren't full. It's quite brutal, isn't it? I found it quite a brutal process, probably because
it's hard, and it depends a bit on the mood of the day too. The days you're brutal, you might have a day of regretting afterwards. So
I think it sounds like you've got the time to do that. I mean, with my mum, she was living in another city, and my brother came down, and so we had 4 days. So we had to be pretty unsentimental because we couldn't linger and start looking at things because we'd either break down or run out of time.
Yeah,
but whereas it sounds like you can dip in and out of it,
that's true. For now, I do have time. Yeah.
So that's taking up your sort of immediate future. Do you have any kind of other seeds of things? What about this novel that you were talking about that was just kind of about half ton or something? Or are you more looking towards perhaps a fresh, new idea?
Yeah, I have another idea that is begun in a very small way, and that's probably what I'll go back to. And it's very different from Nell and contemporary, I think. And
plus you're still doing a lot of freelance editing work, aren't you? Yeah.
Mostly just now for Gecko Press, who do children's books and translation, which is always fun. Yeah.
Is it? What?
Well, yeah. I've just edited a Swedish book about a family of thieves. And I love the sort of subversiveness of the Scandinavian stories, Swedish and
So are you translating from?
No, I don't. I get the translation. And then I zhuzh it up for
sort of bring the life back
parents
into
and
it.
children reading aloud.
So that it isn't sort of a literal translation which kind of falls a bit flat. Is that right?
Can do. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. And if people want to know more about Nell, there's some lovely kind of blog posts and things on Penelope's website, which is penelopetodd.co.nz. So there are artefacts and things that you've come across that you are now sort of expounding on within within those posts to sort of it's almost like a bit of backstory for Nell, really, isn't it?
Yeah, an ongoing story in a sense.
Excellent. Right.
Yeah, and it's published by Cullinane Press. And
I was just coming to that. Yes. For the listeners that don't know, because the launch was a week or so ago, it's at University Bookshop. So Nell is out now, published by Cullinane Press, and available at all good bookshops, obviously, including the University Bookshop. So thanks very much for coming in, Penelope. Really nice to chat,
Thanks,
and
Beverly.
all the best with Nell. It's a charming, insightful, and quite a poignant book. So well done.
Thank you.
Right, now we're going to take a short musical break, and I've picked a tune that is kind of in line with the sort of overall theme of the day, and it's an early Anika Moa track called Mother. Welcome back. You're listening to Right On with me, Beverly Martens. Now, our next guest is poet and novelist Majella Cullinane. Born in Limerick in Ireland, but now firmly and happily ensconced in Port Chalmers with her family. We're talking with Majella today about her third poetry collection, Meantime, which explores the complexity of grief and loss surrounding her mother's death. And it's all the more poignant because of the extraordinary circumstances which sort of accompanied that, just in the sort of time of the world, as it were. So welcome, Majella. Can you give us, the listeners, the sort of context of this collection?
Okay, thanks, Beverly, and thanks for having me. So my mum was diagnosed with vascular dementia in sort of late 2019, but she had been showing, she had been showing for several years signs of forgetfulness. I remember on one occasion she went into town and she didn't know where she was, even though it had been a place she'd been going in and out of for about 35 years. And so the last time I saw her was November, I'm just trying to think now, was it number 28 or 2019? It was shortly before the COVID pandemic. And when I saw her, she had gone downhill, but she, in terms of, she couldn't remember people that she didn't know very well, but she still remembered us. But she was having a lot of sort of visual and auditory delusions by that point, which is a very common part of dementia that, maybe people aren't aware of. So she started to deteriorate and deteriorated further during the COVID, just, before the COVID. So that was from December 2019, sort of early 2020. Obviously with lockdowns happening in Ireland, my sister wasn't able to see her. So because she was a very kind of a sociable woman, I think the lack of contact really had an effect on her. And then she started to lose her language and her speech. And then my sister, I remember it was sometime around mid-March, late March, where there were talks of, world lockdown. It wasn't just New Zealand, it was everywhere. And she was saying, I don't think you're going to be able to get back. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get back either.
Were you talking to your mum on the phone through this? Or?
The last time I'd sort of spoken to her, and I do have a poem in the collection. She was always, typically in Ireland, where often we say, what's the ska, which is like, what's the news? But one of the last things she said to me was, tell me your news, So, but she could hardly speak. She was kind of whispering, and I remember calling her a few times, and the care workers would answer and say, she can't talk. So she kind of, she died on Good Friday. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That's
so Good Friday. It was April 10th, 2020. Yeah.
Because she was a very devout woman, wasn't
she? Was, yeah. And in a way, my sister was saying, take her to sort of die on Good Friday, quite a dramatic exit, and also because Easter was her favourite Christian celebration. She liked Christmas, but she absolutely loved Easter and everything that went with it, including all the chocolate. So, I think it was a nice day to go on, I think. Yeah.
So, of course, that meant that that you couldn't be as involved as you wanted to be, and at your at the launch recently at UBS, Dr. Margaret Ryan, who is a Alzheimer's researcher, isn't she?
That's right.
As well as you having that lovely link that you're both from Limerick.
Yeah.
Yeah. She made the really excellent point about that you actually, because of all of that, you underwent sort of 3 different sorts of grief, which was losing your mother to dementia, then her actual death, and then not being able to attend the funeral because of the travel restrictions.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think, during the lockdown, I think everyone experienced that sort of intense separation of not being allowed to see their loved ones. But I think it was, maybe in many ways, I don't like to put hierarchy on, sort of like your experience was worse than my experience.
Right,
It always kind of irritates me when people do that, because it's not a competition and everyone's experience is valid. But it was harder in the sense of, when you're away from, where your family are and you don't know when you're going to get back to them. Because we were kind of like, we were all wondering at the time, it's like, how long is this lockdown going to be? And we were thinking, it'll be fine by the end of the year. And then it was like another lockdown and another lockdown. So, and funerals are still a very important part of Irish culture. They usually last about 3 days. It's a celebration of someone's life. It's not just a mourning of their life, it's a celebration. And because she was very involved in our local church, I imagine she would have had a huge funeral. The actual fact was, because of COVID, there was a priest, my sister, her husband, and that was it. And my dad.
And you were able to watch it on live stream?
No, there was no live streaming because it was too early for all that. That came later. That came probably 6 months later. My sister did try to send me some pictures and videos, which was very odd in itself, So yeah, the funeral was very, very, very small, But I mean, that was just happening everywhere. I'll never forget one picture I remember in Italy. Remember, it hit Italy really, really hard, and they had the army trucks going through the night and through the villages, removing all of these bodies. And there was this picture of a child and someone who died on the other side of the door and not being able to sort of, have any contact with each other. So yeah, it was a really harrowing time, wasn't it?
I think that's a really good point, though, about the Irish, the way that funerals are done and a celebration of life. And, it's a kind of boots and all thing. Whereas, over here, some funerals are in decent haste, aren't they? 2 days later, 20 minutes.
Yeah. I don't, I mean, I've had different experiences of funerals. One thing over here I wasn't aware of, because certainly it doesn't happen in Ireland, is like an invite to a funeral, which seemed unusual to me, like, that because anybody in Ireland can just rock up to a funeral if they've heard somebody's died. So it's a little bit different. I also think New Zealanders in general, including my own partner who's Kiwi, they find the conversation around death quite morbid, where it's very normal in Ireland to talk about death and dying, and actually having quite a dark sense of humour about it too, So it's not a big deal. I don't find it particularly morbid to talk about death, it's just part of life. So
right.
Yeah.
So you've dedicated Meantime to your mother, and I guess, it's hard to say, does this make this your most personal collection to date? Because all poetry is incredibly personal, isn't it? But I guess I wondered, did that make it hard, like in writing these poems specifically about your mother and your mother's situation and everything, was it cathartic? Was it healing for you? Was it hard to do?
Oh, it was all of those. I do think that, I remember hearing a lot of people say online at the time, they found it really hard to read. They found it hard to write as well. I mean, I didn't write anything very long, but I've kind of felt that keeping diaries or notes of the event, I thought was of what was happening in New Zealand, what was happening in the world, and how it affected all of us and how it affected me personally. I found that hugely cathartic and helpful in writing the poems. I mean, they didn't all come together, obviously. It was sort of written over probably, from before, when she was diagnosed with dementia, and also probably up to like even the last lockdowns, I think were probably early 2022. They went on quite a long time in New Zealand. I mean, it was 2.5 years the country was locked down, because I remember going back in May 22, and that I had not been back in nearly 3 years. And that being quite significant, that we could actually go back and get in without the managed isolation. Yeah.
I mean, it's really recent history, but
a lot of people have forgotten it already.
I know, that's what I'm talking about, memory loss. We were all kind of like, oh, was it then? Was it that? You know, our minds kind of emptied out through that, didn't it?
I kind of, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming years, or, you know, in history books that, you know, maybe people read in 20 or 30 years time, or, you know, because I do think there is a lot of, you know, kind of wanting to forget about it and move on to the next thing, you know, but so much has happened since then. I mean, we've got 2 major conflicts going on in the world. We've got,
Europe,
you know, cost of living crisis, inflation. Yeah. So I think probably people are just trying to get through day-to-day things.
I think they are, and I think that does pull your memory back. But also, of course, it's, you know, life's lived forward and reviewed backwards, isn't it?
That's
so,
right,
you know, we kind of almost smirk when we hear back in the world wars of people saying, it'll be over by Christmas.
Yeah.
You know,
we thought the same thing about COVID.
Yeah. I mean,
it was no different.
We think they're fools. You know, like, of course it wasn't, you know, same with Ukraine, isn't it? I mean, you know, like basically most wars are a 5-year thing, aren't they? But you're right. The same with COVID, is that we didn't know. So we were all, you know, kind of
flying by the seat of our pants
and just rolling with whatever was happening that week, I think. Yeah. So just talking back to your mother, as in terms of her being deeply devout and you not so much, it's kind of mentioned in a couple of the poems. How did that sort of play out in your relationship?
Well, I guess it was a bit of a bone of contention, because I was very devout as a child. You mean, I grew up in 1980s Ireland. It was still very, very devout. It wasn't really until the late 90s, you know, with the scandals in the church, that it started to, the whole thing started to unravel, you know. But so as a child, I was very devout. But I guess, you know, in adolescence, you start to question things. And so wanting to question things more and more, and then just saying, you know, I don't actually want to be part of this institution. So it used to cause huge arguments and disagreements right up until I'd say probably my late 30s. You know, she would, you know, bring it up, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, we're not going to agree, so let's just not talk about it. It just made things easier, you know.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't going to change her opinion, I wasn't going to change my opinion. So that's kind of how it went as I got older. Yeah.
But also you'd established a completely different life and, you know, another part of the world too. So you're always going to have that, your day-to-day lives were going to be different anyway, weren't they?
Very much so. Yeah.
So something else I guess I wanted to talk about was, you know, just the lovely relationships and connections that you've forged here, you know, here. Because you, I mean, just refresh my memory here, Majella, you were the Burns Fellow, and 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's 2014.
Yeah, just because that's sort of when I got to know you.
Yeah.
Just remind me though, did you come to Dunedin for that, or were you already here?
No, so we were actually living in Paikakariki in Kapiti Coast.
Right.
So Andrew's from rural Auckland, and we were living there for a while, and then he found a job in Wellington, and so we moved down to Wellington, and we were there for about a year. That's where Robbie was born, in Wellington. And then we used to go out because I love being near the sea, we used to go out for walks in Paikakariki and Raumati and what was the other one? Lovely beaches, Pauatahanui, I think it was as well. And I was just like, wouldn't it be really nice to live out here, especially Paikok, because I thought it was gorgeous. And so a house came up in Paikok, and we kind of lived there for about 2.5, 3 years. And then I applied for the Burns in 2013, thinking I didn't have a hope in hell of. I just wanted to get down to South Island, actually, because I love the South Island. I was like, if I'm going to live in New Zealand, I want to live in the South Island. because it's more like the weather is more like, what I'm used to, and like the different, beautiful autumn. I love autumns down here. So I applied in late 2013 and came in 2014, and then Andrew got permission with his work to work at home, remote, because it wasn't very common then. It's very common now with post-COVID, but it wasn't common then. And so he got permission, and they were like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Go for a year. And then at the end of the year, I said, do you want to move back? And I was like, no. And do you know? So, he asked his work, and they said, yeah, that's fine. You can just keep working remotely. Because, I just love it down here.
But I also love that about the Burns Fellowship, is that we reel you in with a year. And then because it's such a welcoming writing community as well.
Completely. Yeah, like literally within a few days, you get an email. Someone gets your email, because it's not that hard. Yes. And they say, oh, meet you for lunch. And then they say, oh, I must introduce you to this person and that person and the other person.
Would you mind giving this wee talk over here?
Yeah.
Or would you want to come to that event?
Exactly. And in fact, the last Burns usually is very welcoming. In fact, it doesn't matter what Burns it is. You're supposed to kind of meet them. I think it's kind of like the done thing of just saying, how are you getting on and what are you working on? And, but I do think that really struck me about Dunedin, is the strong writers community. I mean, people write all sorts of things. They have very different opinions, but they always seem to come out for each other.
Yes.
Which
there are no factions. I've not come across any factions, and I wonder if that's partly the size of the city as well.
I think it's probably the recognition that we're all just kind of trying to do our own thing and chipping away, and have great respect for that, actually. Yeah,
I'd agree with that. Now, someone you did get to know very well, because he was one of your PhD supervisors, was the lovely Vincent O'Sullivan, which we lost recently. And I know that you two had a very special relationship.
Vincent was just, he was, people knew him as Vincent, the great Vincent O'Sullivan, and, had sort of a famous or well-known reputation in New Zealand across genres. It was extraordinary, the amount he wrote across genres, so
we didn't treat him like that down here, though.
No,
did we?
no,
you're just always
not at all.
Banging into him at the lift at the library, going up to some event or something. I mean, we were pretty nonplussed.
But he wasn't like that anyway.
I know.
He didn't.
No, I think that's why he enjoyed living here. Actually,
he wasn't like that anyway. But I think someone, again, it was during the Burns, and someone said, "Oh, you should meet Vincent because he's living." So we met, and we kind of hit it off because quite a lot of things in common. His dad was from Kerry, and he grew up in a very sort of Irish Catholic kind of environment in Auckland, and then I was doing my PhD, and I was doing it on the short story, and I thought, well, Vincent's a short story writer, I could ask him, and he didn't hesitate. And then he moved out to Port Chalmers. So when he moved out to Port Chalmers, it being really small, we kind of meet in the local places like Carey's Bay, or he'd come to lunch, or I go to his place, and just became good friends. Vincent he sort of never, and I have several friends like that in Dunedin, it's not about age at all. It's never about age. It's more, a really good point. It's about what you
it's
love.
like-mindedness and collegialness.
Exactly.
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, because often I remember one of my friends commenting once and said, how old is that? How old is your friend? And I was like, oh, I'm not talking about Vincent in particular, but any friend, I was like, oh, about 70. I'm like, oh, and I said, yeah, but it doesn't really matter what age they are as long as you've got lots in common,
Absolutely. Now, I don't want to run out of time here, Majella, in terms of, I wonder if you could share with listeners what your favourite poem in Meantime is.
I don't know if I have a favourite. There is one I like because it sort of shows my mother's sense of humour a little bit. So she, as I mentioned at the start, she was having auditory and visual delusions, and sometimes would hear and see things that weren't there. And so when she'd tell us something, we'd be like, has she actually seen that? And so there was this lovely care worker, a French care worker, that she was quite fond of, because he would kiss her on, he'd go, bonjour, and then he'd like kiss her on the cheeks, and she told me about him, and I was like, I said to my sister, does he actually exist? Yeah. And she said, oh, yeah, he does. So I wrote this poem called Embrasse-moi, which is Give Me a Hug, which is kind of a little bit about this French care worker with the idea of when I wrote it, I actually didn't know if he existed or not. So it wasn't until I found out later. So this is called Embrasse-moi. I couldn't tell you your angel's name, but you said he was French. Angels I've heard of. Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, the iniquitous Lucifer with too much time on his wings. But let's not get into the war between heaven and hell. That's not what this is about. For the sake of argument, let's call yours Jean-Paul. He wore white, of course. No need to bring in feathers just yet. Do angels fall in love? I don't know. Of course not. Don't be daft. I never met your French angel, who one night slipped through the windows of a suburban rest home to comfort fearful souls. A shadow snooped in the dark, threaded through marble corridors, tapped at the pipes, making them shriek like the damned. He dropped a few feathers, stowed his wings under one of the old nuns' beds, thought, they'll never look for them there. Did you impress him with a few words en français? Is that why he decided to linger, reminding you it's only natural to forget who we are? En vérité, madame, I couldn't tell you if I'm man or angel half the time.
Oh, brilliant. It's really nice, Majella. I really enjoyed that. So, Meantime is out now. It's published by University Press. Now, will it also be published in Ireland like some of your other works?
Kind of working on that at the moment. So wait, watch that space.
Watch that space. Yeah. Also, in terms of watching the space, I understand you're working on a short story collection at the moment.
Yes.
Is that right? How's that going?
So I've sort of actually just this morning finished the first rough draft of the last story. So hopefully that's coming out next year.
So you've got a home for it?
Yeah, I've got a home for it with Quentin Wilson.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think, are you also teaching a novel writing course at the library at the minute?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment.
No.
Right.
But I maybe hope to write. I was thinking maybe, because novel writing is such a big project and it's very specific, and also thinking it's winter as well, of maybe next year in the summer of running just a general creative writing course. You know, I think they tend to be a bit more like doable for a lot of people.
Yeah, probably not so intimidating for some
Yeah.
people to sign up for, but you do those at the Port Chalmers Library, don't you?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks, Majella. So that's pretty much our show, listeners, apart from a quick reminder about our local Flash Fiction Day event, which is on the 22nd of June, and the one here in Dunedin will be held at Alexander Pianos, which, if you don't know, is right beside the King Edward Tech up at Upper Stewart Street. It'll be a lovely afternoon of people reading their flash fiction, announcing some winners, and generally yet another sort of social fellowship kind of get together for the writing community here in Dunedin. So if anyone's listening and want to go, it starts at 2:30 on Saturday week, which is the 22nd of June. So, as I said, that's pretty much our show. Thanks for listening. Keep reading, keep writing, and we'll talk to you again next month.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the University Bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.